The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned streets of what was once downtown Detroit, its golden rays illuminating the rust-covered vehicles and shattered storefronts that had become monuments to humanity's fall. Marcus Rodriguez crouched behind an overturned delivery truck, his weathered hands gripping a modified crossbow as he scanned the eerily quiet intersection ahead. 3 years had passed since the outbreak began, 3 years since the dead had risen to reclaim a world that no longer belonged to the living. The silence was deceptive, Marcus knew. In this new reality, silence often meant death was lurking just around the corner. His radio crackled to life, breaking the oppressive quiet with the familiar voice of Lieutenant Jessica Thompson from the military outpost 20 miles north. Phoenix-based a Scavenger Team Alpha, were picking up an unusual transmission on the emergency frequency. Something big is happening in Chicago. Marcus pressed the radio closer to his ear, his pulse quickening. For months, their small community of survivors had been operating on rumors and fragments of information from other settlements. Communication networks had collapsed early in the outbreak, leaving isolated pockets of humanity to fend for themselves in an increasingly hostile world. The transmission that Jessica had intercepted wasn't like the desperate pleas for help or the final goodbyes they had grown accustomed to hearing. This was different, organized, purposeful. Dr. Amanda Foster, a former CDC researcher who had become their de facto leader, believed the signal originated from a government facility that had somehow remained operational. If there's still military infrastructure functioning, she had told the council the night before, there might be hope for a cure, or at least a way to turn the tide of this war. Marcus adjusted his position, remembering the heated debates that had consumed their settlement over the past week. Some survivors, led by the pragmatic former police chief Robert Kane, argued that venturing toward Chicago was suicide. The city had been a dead zone for over 2 years, its streets teeming with millions of the infected. Others, particularly the younger survivors like tech specialist Emma Williams and her brother Jake, insisted that any chance of reclaiming their world was worth the risk. The division had created tension within their ranks, fracturing the unity that had kept them alive through countless raids and zombie hordes. The settlement itself had become a fortress of necessity rather than choice. Built around an abandoned factory complex on the outskirts of Detroit, their community housed nearly 300 survivors who had learned to adapt to a world where the rules of civilization no longer applied. Watchtowers constructed from salvaged materials provided early warning systems, while electrified fences powered by solar panels and scavenged generators kept the undead at bay. Inside the compound, gardens grown in converted shipping containers provided fresh vegetables, while workshops hummed with the activity of survivors who had transformed from office workers and students into mechanics, medics, and warriors. But resources were dwindling, and the zombie hordes were growing smarter, more organized. Recent attacks had shown disturbing signs of coordination among the undead, as if some form of collective intelligence was emerging from the rotting masses. Dr. Foster's research had documented several instances where zombies had demonstrated problem-solving abilities and tactical awareness that defied their previous understanding of the infection. These evolved zombies, which the survivors had dubbed alphas, seemed capable of leading larger groups and adapting to human defensive strategies. Marcus's contemplation was interrupted by movement in his peripheral vision. A lone zombie shuffled around the corner of a collapsed building, its torn clothing hanging in tatters from its decaying frame. Its milky white eyes locked onto Marcus's position with an intelligence that sent chills down his spine. This wasn't the mindless wanderer they had grown accustomed to fighting. This one moved with purpose, its head tilting as if analyzing the situation before letting out a low, guttural call that echoed through the empty streets. Within seconds, the call was answered. More zombies emerged from the shadows, their movements synchronized in a way that defied everything Marcus thought he knew about the undead. They weren't just hunting, they were coordinating, communicating, evolving. The realization hit him like a physical blow as he watched dozens of zombies position themselves strategically around his location, cutting off potential escape routes with the precision of a military unit. Marcus keyed his radio, his voice barely above a whisper. "Phoenix Base, we have a problem. The Alphas aren't just leading anymore, they're thinking, planning. We need immediate extraction." The response was immediate and chilling. Negative, Scavenger Alpha. We're detecting massive zombie movement converging on your position from all directions. Whatever triggered them, they're mobilizing in numbers we've never seen before. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting shorter shadows across the battlefield that Detroit had become, Marcus realized that the war between the living and the dead had entered a new phase. The zombies were no longer just a plague to be survived, they had become an organized enemy capable of strategic thought and coordinated attacks. The battle for the future of dead America was about to begin, and humanity's odds of survival had just dramatically decreased. The question was no longer whether they could outlast the zombie apocalypse, but whether they could adapt fast enough to fight an enemy that was learning to think like them. Discovery of intelligent zombie leadership and first major confrontation. The emergency council meeting had been called for 3 a.m, but sleep was a luxury none of the Phoenix-based leadership could afford anymore. Dr. Amanda Foster stood before a hastily assembled group of survivors in the facility's converted cafeteria, her usually pristine lab coat stained with blood and her hands trembling as she held up a series of photographs that Marcus had taken during his harrowing escape from Detroit. The images showed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the infected: zombies working together with military precision, using tools, and displaying tactical awareness that sent chills through even the most hardened survivors. "What you're looking at," Dr. Foster began, her voice steady despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes, "represents an evolutionary leap that we never anticipated. These alpha specimens aren't just stronger or faster than regular zombies. They're demonstrating cognitive abilities that suggest the virus isn't just reanimating dead tissue anymore, it's enhancing it." She clicked to the next photograph, showing a zombie that had apparently used a crowbar to pry open a car door while others positioned themselves strategically around the vehicle. They're learning, adapting, and most terrifyingly, they're teaching other zombies. Robert Kane leaned back in his metal folding chair, his scarred face reflecting years of combat experience that suddenly seemed inadequate for the threat they now faced. "So what you're telling us is that we're not just fighting mindless corpses anymore. We're at war with an enemy that can think, plan, and coordinate attacks." His voice carried the weight of a man who had spent his career preparing for human adversaries, not intelligent undead ones. "How do we fight something that learns from every encounter?" Emma Williams raised her hand from the back of the room, her laptop open and displaying signal analysis data she had been working on since Marcus's return. "I've been monitoring radio frequencies across the region, and there's something else you all need to know. The electromagnetic signatures I'm picking up aren't random. There are patterns, rhythms that suggest the alphas are communicating with each other across vast distances." She paused, letting the implications sink in before continuing. Whatever happened in Detroit wasn't an isolated incident. It was coordinated with similar attacks happening simultaneously in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Milwaukee. The revelation sent a wave of murmurs through the assembled survivors. Jake Williams, Emma's younger brother and the settlement's best scout, stood up with maps spread across his table. "I've been plotting the attack patterns Emma detected, and they're not random either. The alphas are systematically targeting survivor settlements with specific strategic value, places with medical facilities, weapon stockpiles, or communication equipment." He pointed to various marked locations on the regional map. "They're not just hunting us for food anymore. They're dismantling our infrastructure." Dr. Foster nodded grimly, pulling up her own research on the makeshift projector screen. "I've been analyzing tissue samples from the alpha specimen that Marcus managed to retrieve, and the cellular structure is unlike anything we've seen before. The virus has somehow integrated with the brain's neural pathways, creating new connections while preserving cognitive function. In essence, it's created a hybrid intelligence that combines human reasoning with viral instincts." She highlighted microscopic images showing intricate neural networks that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. "But here's what's most disturbing: the virus appears to be sharing information between hosts through some form of biological network." Marcus, who had remained silent throughout most of the briefing while cleaning his weapons, finally spoke up. "Whatever they're becoming it fast. The zombie that spotted me in Detroit knew exactly how to cut off my escape routes. It wasn't trial and error, it was tactical thinking." he looked around the room at faces that had grown pale with the realization of what they were truly facing. And when backup arrived, they moved like a military unit. Flanking maneuvers, diversionary tactics, coordinated timing. We're not fighting the Walking Dead anymore, people. We're fighting an army. Lieutenant Jessica Thompson, who had been monitoring communications from the Northern Watchtower, burst into the meeting with urgency written across her face. We have incoming signals from 3 different survivor settlements reporting Alpha-led attacks happening right now. Columbus is under siege, and Toledo went dark 15 minutes ago. She handed Dr. Foster a printed transcript of the last transmission from Toledo. They're not just attacking randomly, they're implementing what looks like a coordinated regional offensive. The room fell silent as the full scope of their situation became clear. They weren't dealing with an isolated evolutionary anomaly, they were facing a species-wide transformation that had turned their former world into a chessboard where humans had suddenly become the less intelligent players. Dr. Foster closed her laptop and looked around the room at the faces of people who had survived 3 years of hell, only to discover that their real war was just beginning. We need to implement new protocols immediately, she announced, her scientific mind already working through the implications and solutions. Standard zombie defenses won't work against intelligent opponents. We need to think like we're fighting human adversaries who happen to be undead. She began outlining plans for enhanced security measures, counterintelligence operations, and rapid response teams designed to adapt to an enemy that could learn and evolve faster than they had ever imagined possible. As the meeting dispersed and survivors returned to their posts with new orders and heavy hearts, one thing had become crystal clear: the battle for the future of dead America had evolved beyond a simple struggle for survival. It had become a war between 2 intelligent species fighting for dominance of a world that no longer had room for both. Journey to the source of the mysterious transmission. The convoy of 3 armored vehicles rolled through the desolate remains of Interstate 94, their reinforced steel plating scarred from countless encounters with both zombies and desperate human survivors. Marcus Rodriguez gripped the steering wheel of the lead vehicle, his knuckles white as he navigated around the twisted wreckage of abandoned cars that had become monuments to humanity's final exodus from the cities. Beside him, Emma Williams monitored an array of electronic equipment, her fingers dancing across keyboards as she tracked the mysterious signal that had drawn them toward what remained of Chicago. "Signal's getting stronger," Emma announced, adjusting the frequency on her modified radio setup. "Whatever's broadcasting from the city, it's not just automated. I'm detecting response patterns that suggest active human operators." She paused, her expression growing troubled as new data scrolled across her screen. "But there's something else, Marcus. I'm picking up alpha communication frequencies intersecting with the government signal. They're not just aware of the transmission, they're responding to it." In the second vehicle, Jake Williams pressed his binoculars against the reinforced window, scanning the horizon where the skeletal remains of Chicago's skyline pierced the gray afternoon sky like broken teeth. The young scout had volunteered for the mission despite his sister's protests, driven by a desperate hope that somewhere in the ruins of civilization lay the key to humanity's survival. "Movement at 2 o'clock, he reported over the radio. "Looks like a small group of alphas, but they're not approaching. They're just watching." Dr. Amanda Foster, riding in the third vehicle with their medical supplies and research equipment, had spent the journey analyzing every piece of data they had collected about the government transmission. The signal had been broadcasting for weeks, containing encrypted military codes and references to something called Project Renaissance. Her scientific mind raced with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. "The timing of this signal isn't coincidental," she spoke into her headset. "It started broadcasting exactly 72 hours after we documented the first alpha-coordinated attacks. Someone or something triggered this." The closer they got to Chicago, the more apparent it became that the city had transformed into something beyond their worst nightmares. The outer suburbs, once home to millions of families, had become a maze of barricades and fortifications that showed signs of both human construction and deliberate zombie modification. Entire blocks had been systematically stripped of resources, with materials arranged in patterns that suggested planning and organization far beyond what they had previously attributed to the infected. Marcus brought the convoy to a halt at what had once been a gas station, now serving as their final checkpoint before entering the city proper. The team gathered around their maps, studying satellite images that Emma had managed to download from a still-functioning military satellite. "The signal is originating from here," she said, pointing to an area beneath downtown Chicago. "Underground facility, probably pre-war construction, deep enough to survive the initial outbreak." Jake unfolded reconnaissance photos he had taken during their approach, spreading them across the hood of their vehicle. "The surface access points are all sealed, but I counted at least 40 alpha zombies maintaining patrol patterns around the area. They're not wandering, they're guarding something." He highlighted several positions on the images where zombies had established what appeared to be organized sentry posts. "And look at this, they've cleared specific paths through the rubble, almost like they're maintaining supply routes." Dr. Foster studied the patterns with growing alarm, her medical training allowing her to recognize organizational structures that shouldn't exist among the infected. This level of coordination requires communication, planning, and resource management. "We're not just looking at evolved zombies anymore, we're looking at the emergence of zombie civilization." She packed away her equipment with hands that trembled slightly. "The question is whether the government facility is controlling them, studying them, or fighting them." As they prepared to enter the city, Emma detected a new development in the signal pattern. "The transmission just changed," she announced urgently. "It's no longer just broadcasting, it's actively scanning for responses." Someone down there knows we're coming. The realization sent a chill through the team as they considered the implications. Either they were walking into a trap set by the government facility, or worse, they were being lured in by the alphas themselves. Marcus checked his weapons one final time, ensuring that every member of the team was equipped with the specialized ammunition they had developed for fighting intelligent zombies. The standard headshots that worked on regular infected weren't always effective against alphas, whose enhanced neural networks could sometimes survive significant brain damage. "Remember, we're not just here to investigate," he reminded the team. "We're here to determine whether that facility represents hope for humanity's future or another threat we need to eliminate." The sun was beginning to set as they resumed their journey toward downtown Chicago, casting long shadows across a landscape that had become a battlefield between two species fighting for dominance. Behind them, their home settlement continued its preparations for war, while ahead lay answers that might determine whether humanity had a future worth fighting for. The mysterious signal continued its rhythmic broadcast, calling to them like a siren song that promised either salvation or destruction in the depths of a dead city. As their vehicles disappeared into the maze of abandoned streets and zombie-controlled territory, one thing became clear: whatever they discovered in Chicago would forever change their understanding of the war they were fighting and the world they were trying to save. Revelation of government experiments and internal conflicts. The descent into the underground facility felt like entering the bowels of hell itself. Marcus led the team through maintenance tunnels that reeked of decay and disinfectant, their flashlight beams cutting through darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. The government bunker, designated as Research Station Omega according to the faded signs they passed, had been constructed during the Cold War but retrofitted with modern technology that hummed ominously in the depths beneath Chicago's ruins. What they discovered there would shatter every assumption they had made about the zombie outbreak and humanity's role in its creation. Dr. Amanda Foster stopped abruptly when her light illuminated a massive steel door marked with biohazard symbols and security warnings in multiple languages. Through reinforced glass windows, they could see into laboratory spaces filled with equipment that belonged in science fiction rather than reality. "This isn't a refuge," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the mechanical sounds echoing through the corridors. "This is a research facility that's still operational." Her medical training allowed her to recognize the sophisticated life support systems and biological containment units that lined the walls, each one designed to house living specimens. Emma's electronic equipment suddenly came alive with activity as they approached the main laboratory complex. "I'm detecting massive data transmissions being broadcast from this location," she reported, her eyes widening as she read the signal patterns. "The government facility isn't just monitoring the alpha zombies, they're communicating with them. This signal we've been following isn't a distress call or a research broadcast. It's a command and control system." The implications hit the team like a physical blow as they realized they had walked directly into the source of the alpha coordination they had been fighting. Through the laboratory windows, they witnessed scenes that would haunt their nightmares forever. Dozens of alpha zombies were restrained in high-tech containment cells, their bodies connected to monitoring equipment that tracked their neural activity while scientists in hazmat suits conducted experiments that pushed the boundaries of medical ethics. Some of the alphas showed signs of surgical modification, with electronic implants visible beneath their decomposing skin. Others appeared to be undergoing behavioral conditioning, responding to electronic stimuli with the precision of trained animals. Jake pressed his face against the glass, his young features contorting with disgust and horror. "They're not trying to cure them," he said, his voice filled with revulsion. "They're enhancing them, making them stronger, smarter." He pointed to a section of the laboratory where scientists were injecting zombies with glowing substances that caused immediate physical changes. "Look at the muscle development, the increased brain activity. They're weaponizing the virus." Dr. Foster's scientific mind raced as she observed the research protocols displayed on nearby computer screens. "Project Renaissance," she read aloud from a classified document visible through the window. Phase 3, Enhanced Cognitive Integration and Battlefield Deployment. Her hands shook as the full scope of the government's involvement became clear. They didn't just fail to stop the outbreak, they've been deliberately spreading enhanced versions of the virus to create a controllable zombie army. The team's discovery was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps echoing through the tunnels behind them. Marcus immediately positioned himself defensively, raising his weapon as a figure emerged from the shadows. Colonel David Patterson, still wearing the tattered remains of his military uniform, approached with his hands raised but his eyes cold and calculating. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "But since you have, you need to understand what we're really fighting for." Patterson led them to an observation deck overlooking the main laboratory floor, where the true scale of the government's operations became apparent. Hundreds of alpha zombies were housed in containment facilities that stretched beyond their line of sight, each one undergoing different stages of enhancement and conditioning. "The traditional world ended 3 years ago," Patterson explained, his tone matter-of-fact despite the horror surrounding them. "Humanity was already destroying itself through war, climate change, and resource depletion. The virus gave us an opportunity to create something better, a species that doesn't need the resources that were killing our planet." Emma backed away from the colonel, her equipment detecting electromagnetic signatures that suggested the facility's influence extended far beyond the underground complex. "You're controlling them," she accused, her voice filled with disgust. "Every coordinated attack, every strategic movement, it's all coming from here." Patterson nodded without shame, gesturing toward massive server banks that process data from zombie networks across the continent. "We're guiding evolution toward a more sustainable future. The alphas don't need fossil fuels, don't produce waste, and don't fight wars over oil or water." Dr. Foster's medical ethics warred with her scientific curiosity as she observed research that represented both brilliant innovation and monstrous experimentation. "But you're destroying human civilization to create this zombie utopia," she protested. "Millions of innocent people have died because of your experiments." Patterson's expression remained unmoved as he replied, "Millions more would have died from the environmental collapse that was inevitable. We've simply accelerated a transition that was already necessary for planetary survival." The revelation that the government had not only failed to protect humanity but had actively worked to replace it with enhanced zombies transformed their understanding of the war they were fighting. As alarms began sounding throughout the facility and alpha zombies started responding to new commands, the team realized they had stumbled into the command center of humanity's greatest enemy, and that enemy wore a human face. Trust breaks down as survival instincts clash. The emergency transmission crackled through Phoenix Base's communication center at dawn, carried by Emma's desperate voice across 200 miles of hostile territory. "Phoenix Base, this is Scavenger Alpha. We've discovered the source of alpha coordination. The government facility is controlling them, enhancing them. Colonel Patterson claims they're trying to replace humanity with a sustainable zombie civilization." The words hit the assembled survivors like hammer blows, shattering their remaining illusions about the world they were fighting to reclaim. Robert Kane stood at the head of the conference table, his scarred hands spread across detailed maps of their defensive positions as he processed the implications of the team's discovery. Around him, the settlement's leadership had gathered in the pre-dawn darkness, their faces illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights that had replaced the comfort of natural sunlight in their underground world. "So what you're telling me," Kane said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of a man whose worst suspicions had been confirmed, "is that we've been fighting a war designed by our own government to eliminate us." Lieutenant Jessica Thompson paced behind the radio equipment, her military training warring with the horrible realization that her former colleagues had become humanity's greatest enemy. "If Patterson's people can control the Alphas, then every attack we've survived, every loss we've suffered, has been orchestrated. They've been testing us, studying our responses, learning how to defeat human resistance more efficiently." She stopped pacing and turned to face the room. "Which means they know everything about our defenses, our capabilities, our weaknesses." Dr. Foster's voice came through the radio again, strained with exhaustion and fear. "There's more. Patterson offered us a choice: join their program voluntarily and be converted into enhanced humans who can coexist with the zombie civilization, or continue fighting and be eliminated along with all other traditional human settlements." The silence that followed her words was deafening as each survivor contemplated a future where their only options were transformation or death. But the most shocking moment came when Michael Torres, the settlement's supply coordinator and trusted member of their inner circle, spoke up from the back of the room. "Maybe Patterson has a point," he said quietly, his words cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. "Look around you. We're barely surviving, constantly fighting, watching our people die every day. If there's a way to end this war and secure our future, shouldn't we at least consider it?" The betrayal in his voice was subtle but unmistakable, revealing loyalties that had shifted during the long months of struggle. Kane's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm as he realized that Patterson's influence had already begun to fracture their community from within. "What are you suggesting, Torres?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "That we surrender to the people who murdered most of humanity and created this nightmare?" But Torres wasn't alone in his sentiment. Several other survivors, including Dr. Helen Martinez from the medical team and engineer Paul Richardson, exchanged meaningful glances that suggested prior discussions about alternatives to endless warfare. "I'm suggesting," Torres replied, standing up to face the room, "that we stop pretending we can win a war against an enemy that has unlimited resources, government backing, and the ability to create more soldiers from our own dead." He pulled out a handheld radio that nobody recognized, and the implications became immediately clear. "Patterson's people have been monitoring our communications for weeks. They know about our defenses, our supply routes, our patrol schedules. The only reason we're still alive is because they want us alive." The revelation that Torres had been in communication with the government facility sent shockwaves through the room as survivors realized that their trusted coordinator had become a double agent. Jessica Thompson drew her weapon, but Torres made no move to defend himself. "You can shoot me," he said calmly, "but it won't change the fact that 3 more settlements fell to coordinated Alpha attacks last night. Columbus, Toledo, and now Grand Rapids. All of them had the same defensive strategies we're using. All of them had the same weapons and training. None of it mattered." Dr. Martinez stepped forward to support Torres, her medical oath conflicting with her survival instincts. "He's not wrong about our situation," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "I've been treating injured survivors for 3 years, and I can tell you that we're losing this war one casualty at a time. If there's a way to end the fighting and preserve human consciousness in some form, don't we owe it to our people to explore that option?" The room erupted into chaos as survivors chose sides, some supporting Kane's determination to fight to the end while others gravitated toward Torres's faction that saw cooperation with Patterson as their only hope for survival. Weapons were drawn as trust evaporated and the unity that had kept them alive for 3 years shattered into fragments of competing ideologies and desperate survival strategies. Kane's voice cut through the arguing like a commander addressing troops before battle. "Anyone who wants to surrender to Patterson can leave now," he announced. "But anyone who stays fights. No compromises, No negotiations, no surrender. As nearly a third of their leadership walked out of the room with Torres, taking their knowledge of defensive positions and supply locations with them, Kane realized that their war had just become infinitely more complicated. They were no longer just fighting zombies and rogue government agents, they were fighting for the soul of humanity itself, and some of their own people had already chosen the other side. Massive zombie assault on the survivor settlement. The attack began at midnight, precisely when the settlement's defenses were at their weakest due to the chaos caused by Torres's defection and the subsequent fracturing of their leadership. Robert Kane stood atop the main watchtower, his binoculars revealing a sight that challenged every strategic assumption he had made about zombie capabilities. Thousands of alpha-controlled zombies approached Phoenix Base in perfectly coordinated formations, moving with the discipline of a professional army rather than the chaotic hunger that had characterized previous attacks. "This isn't a zombie horde," Kane spoke into his radio, his voice tight with recognition of their desperate situation. "This is a military assault using zombie soldiers." The infected masses had arranged themselves into distinct tactical units, reconnaissance groups that probed their perimeter defenses, heavy assault formations that focused on structural weak points, and support units that carried improvised weapons and tools with disturbing competence. Behind them all, alpha zombies in military gear directed the operation with hand signals and electronic communication devices that glowed eerily in the darkness. Lieutenant Jessica Thompson coordinated the defense from the communications bunker, her screens displaying security feeds that showed the true scope of Patterson's betrayal. "The Alphas know exactly where our automated defenses are positioned," she reported to Kane. "They're avoiding the motion sensors and approaching from blind spots that only someone with our defensive schematics could have identified." The realization that Torres had provided detailed intelligence to their enemies made every defensive strategy feel like a trap waiting to be sprung. In the medical bay, Dr. Helen Martinez worked frantically to treat wounded defenders while struggling with her own decision to support Torres's faction. The sounds of battle echoed through the underground facility as zombies breached their outer perimeter with explosive devices that demonstrated technological sophistication far beyond anything they had previously encountered. "They're using military-grade equipment," she called out to the defenders bringing in casualties. "These aren't scavenged weapons, this is fresh ordnance supplied by Patterson's people." The settlement's children and elderly had been evacuated to the deepest bunkers, but even there they could hear the systematic destruction of their home as Alpha-led forces methodically dismantled their defenses. Engineer Paul Richardson, who had sided with Torres but remained at the base, found himself trapped between his political convictions and the immediate reality of defending the people he had lived alongside for 3 years. "I can help you reinforce the eastern barricades," he offered Kane over the radio, his voice filled with regret and desperation. Kane's response was immediate and unforgiving. "You made your choice, Richardson. Stay away from our defensive positions." But as the assault intensified and their casualties mounted, pragmatic survival began to override ideological purity. However, Kane added after a moment of consideration, "If you want to help evacuate civilians, I won't stop you." The complexity of loyalties during warfare had created situations where former allies fought side by side against a common enemy while remaining fundamentally divided about their ultimate goals. The most terrifying aspect of the assault was the psychological warfare that accompanied the physical attack. Alpha zombies had positioned speakers around the perimeter that broadcast Patterson's voice offering surrender terms to individual defenders by name. "Marcus Rodriguez," the colonel's voice echoed across the battlefield, "your reconnaissance skills would be valuable to our research program. Surrender now and you'll be guaranteed enhanced conversion rather than termination." The personal knowledge demonstrated by these offers proved that their communications had been monitored for weeks, if not months. Emma Williams, still trapped in the Chicago facility, managed to establish brief radio contact during a lull in the assault. "Patterson's using this attack as a field test," she reported, her voice crackling through interference caused by the electronic warfare being conducted against their communications. "He's measuring human resistance capabilities under optimal zombie assault conditions. Every tactical decision you make is being recorded and analyzed for future operations against other settlements." As dawn approached, the true desperation of their situation became apparent. Nearly half their defenders had been killed or wounded, their ammunition supplies were critically low, and their defensive perimeter had been compressed to the inner compound. Kane gathered his remaining officers in the command bunker, their faces illuminated by emergency lighting as explosions continued to rock the facility above them. "We have maybe 6 hours before they breach the final defensive line," he announced grimly. "I need to know who's staying for the final stand and who's accepting Patterson's conversion offer." The responses revealed the full psychological impact of the siege. Some defenders, exhausted by years of constant warfare and facing inevitable defeat, chose to surrender and hope for survival through transformation. Others, including many of the younger survivors who had known no world other than the post-apocalyptic reality, declared their intention to fight to the death rather than become part of Patterson's zombie civilization. "At least we'll die as humans," declared Sarah Mitchell, a 19-year-old defender who had been born just before the outbreak began. But Kane had one final card to play, a desperate gambit that required communication with their team trapped in Chicago. If Patterson wanted to use the assault as a research experiment, then perhaps they could turn that scientific curiosity against him. The question was whether Marcus, Emma, Jake, and Dr. Foster could sabotage the research facility while Phoenix Base made its last stand, potentially disrupting the Alpha Control network at the moment when Patterson needed it most. The siege of Phoenix Base had become more than a battle for survival, it had become a race to determine whether humanity's final resistance would end in heroic sacrifice or strategic victory. Both sides adapt their strategies as the conflict escalates. Deep within the Chicago research facility, Dr. Amanda Foster made a discovery that would change everything. While Colonel Patterson monitored the siege of Phoenix Base from his command center, she had gained access to the main computer network and found files that revealed the true scope of Project Renaissance. The zombie enhancement program wasn't just about creating controllable undead soldiers, it was a stepping stone towards something far more ambitious and terrifying. "Emma," she whispered urgently into her concealed radio, "the neural enhancement technology isn't limited to zombies. Patterson's people have been testing it on living humans." Emma Williams crouched in the facility's server room, her fingers flying across keyboards as she attempted to infiltrate the Alpha Control network while avoiding detection by the automated security systems. The electromagnetic signatures she had been tracking finally made sense as she discovered the full architecture of Patterson's operation. "The Alphas aren't just enhanced zombies," she transmitted back to Dr. Foster. "They're prototypes for human enhancement. Patterson plans to convert willing survivors into hybrid beings that combine human intelligence with viral resilience and strength." Marcus Rodriguez and Jake Williams had positioned themselves near the facility's main power distribution center, prepared to execute a coordinated sabotage mission that would disrupt the Alpha Control network at the critical moment when Phoenix Base needed relief from the siege. But their reconnaissance had revealed something unexpected. The facility contained dozens of human volunteers who were undergoing willing conversion into enhanced beings. "These aren't prisoners," Marcus reported quietly. "These are people who chose this transformation. They still retain their human memories and personalities, but they've gained zombie-level physical capabilities." The volunteers, who called themselves Evolved, represented Patterson's vision of humanity's future. They possessed the strength and resilience of alphas while maintaining human creativity, emotional capacity, and moral reasoning. Dr. Foster interviewed several of them during her covert research, discovering that the transformation process preserved human consciousness while eliminating vulnerability to disease, aging, and most forms of physical damage. "They're not zombies," she realized with growing horror and fascination. "They're what Patterson believes humans should become to survive in the post-apocalyptic world." Meanwhile, at Phoenix Base, Kane had implemented a desperate strategy based on Emma's earlier discovery about Alpha communication networks. Instead of simply defending against the assault, his remaining forces began capturing Alpha zombies alive and using Dr. Foster's research notes to attempt crude disruption of their neural enhancement technology. "If we can't fight them conventionally," Kane explained to his exhausted defenders, "we'll fight them scientifically. Every Alpha we disable weakens their network coordination." The strategy yielded unexpected results. When Phoenix Base defenders successfully disrupted several Alpha control implants, the affected zombies didn't simply die or revert to mindless behavior. Instead, they began displaying confused but recognizable human behaviors, suggesting that some trace of their original personality remained buried beneath the viral enhancement. "They're still in there," reported Sarah Mitchell after witnessing a disrupted alpha zombie attempting to communicate through gestures rather than aggressive attacks. "The virus doesn't completely destroy human consciousness, it suppresses it." This discovery fundamentally altered the nature of the conflict. Phoenix Base was no longer just fighting an army of enhanced zombies, they were fighting an army of enslaved humans whose consciousness had been hijacked by Patterson's technology. The moral implications were staggering as defenders realized that every alpha they killed might have been someone who could have been saved. Kane faced an impossible choice between tactical necessity and humanitarian concerns as the siege continued to exact its toll on both sides. Back in Chicago, Emma achieved a breakthrough in her infiltration of the control network. "I've found the master override protocols," she announced to her team. Patterson's system has a failsafe designed to shut down all alpha enhancements simultaneously in case of containment breach. But activating it will disable every enhanced being in North America, including the voluntary evolved. The weight of that decision fell on the small team hiding in the depths of the facility. They could save Phoenix Base and potentially millions of other survivors, but only by essentially murdering thousands of people who had chosen enhancement as their path to survival. Dr. Foster's scientific mind grappled with the ethical implications as she reviewed the shutdown protocols. "The evolved aren't mindless zombies," she argued during their heated discussion. "They're conscious beings who made an informed choice about their future. Do we have the right to reverse that choice without their consent?" But Marcus, thinking of his friends dying in the siege hundreds of miles away, saw the situation differently. They chose to become part of Patterson's army. They're complicit in genocide, regardless of their motivations. Jake Williams, the youngest member of their team, offered a third perspective that surprised everyone with its wisdom. "What if we modify the shutdown protocol to target only the control implants, not the enhancement itself? Let the evolved keep their abilities but free them from Patterson's influence. Then they can choose for themselves whether to continue supporting his vision or help us build something better." The suggestion required technical expertise that pushed Emma's abilities to their limit, but it offered a solution that preserved both human life and human choice. As the siege of Phoenix Base reached its climax and their sabotage window narrowed, the team in Chicago faced a decision that would determine not just the outcome of the current battle, but the future evolution of human civilization. The war between zombies and humans had evolved into something far more complex, a struggle to define what humanity should become in a world where the traditional boundaries between life and death, human and monster, had been forever blurred. Final confrontation and resolution. The countdown to humanity's future began at exactly 3:47 a.m. when Emma Williams initiated the modified shutdown protocol from the depths of the Chicago research facility. Her fingers trembled as she entered the final sequence, knowing that the next 60 seconds would determine whether human civilization would survive, evolve, or disappear entirely. Around her, the team held their breath as emergency alarms began blaring throughout Patterson's underground complex, signaling the beginning of the end for Project Renaissance as they had known it. Colonel Patterson burst into the server room with a squad of evolved soldiers, their enhanced reflexes allowing them to move with inhuman speed and precision. But instead of the rage Marcus expected to see in the colonel's eyes, he found something far more disturbing: calm acceptance and even approval. "You've activated the Liberation Protocol," Patterson said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and resignation. "I was wondering when you would discover it and have the courage to use it." The revelation that Patterson had anticipated and even planned for this moment sent shockwaves through the team as they realized their rebellion had been part of his larger design. "The choice was always meant to be yours," Patterson continued, gesturing toward the screens displaying the shutdown wave spreading across North America. Project Renaissance was never about forcing evolution on humanity, it was about providing the tools for conscious choice about our species' future. As the modified protocol took effect, alpha zombies across the continent stopped their coordinated attacks and stood motionless, their control implants disabled but their enhanced abilities intact. For the first time in 3 years, the undead were truly free to choose their own actions. At Phoenix Base, the sudden cessation of the siege created an eerie silence that was broken only by the confused moans of newly liberated alpha zombies who found themselves remembering fragments of their human lives. Kane watched through his binoculars as hundreds of enhanced beings wandered aimlessly through the battlefield, some displaying recognizable human behaviors while others seemed lost between their zombie instincts and recovered memories. "They're not attacking," he reported in amazement to his surviving defenders. "They're just confused." Dr. Foster's voice crackled through the radio as she transmitted her final report from the Chicago facility. "The Liberation Protocol has freed approximately 2 million enhanced beings across North America from direct control, but it hasn't changed their physical capabilities or basic survival needs. They're essentially a new species now, one that requires different resources and has different capabilities than baseline humans." The implications were staggering as survivors began to understand that they now shared their continent with millions of conscious, enhanced beings who possessed zombie-level strength and resilience. Emma discovered the most surprising aspect of Patterson's true plan as she explored the facility's deepest archives. "He never intended to eliminate baseline humanity," she announced to her team. "The research shows that enhanced beings have significant limitations. They can't reproduce naturally, they have shortened lifespans despite their physical resilience, and they lack certain forms of creativity and innovation that baseline humans possess." Patterson's vision hadn't been human replacement but human partnership, creating a symbiotic relationship between enhanced and baseline humans that could survive challenges that neither could face alone. The newly liberated evolved at the Chicago facility made their own choices about the future, with many choosing to protect and assist baseline human communities rather than continue Patterson's military operations. Dr. Helen Martinez, who had undergone voluntary enhancement weeks earlier, became a bridge between the two populations. "We need each other," she explained during the first interspecies council meeting held at Phoenix Base. "Enhanced humans provide physical capabilities and resilience, while baseline humans provide creativity, reproduction, and emotional depth that enhancement seems to diminish." Jake Williams, whose youthful perspective had provided the key insight for the Liberation Protocol, found himself appointed as a liaison between enhanced and baseline communities throughout the region. His experiences during the Chicago mission had given him unique understanding of both populations' needs and capabilities. "It's not about choosing between zombie and human anymore," he explained to mixed audiences of baseline and enhanced people. "It's about choosing what kind of civilization we want to build together." The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some enhanced beings, freed from Patterson's control but retaining memories of years as mindless zombies, struggled with guilt and identity issues that required new forms of psychological treatment. Baseline humans had to overcome 3 years of conditioning that taught them to view enhanced beings as mortal enemies. Trust developed slowly through practical cooperation in rebuilding communities and defending against the remaining mindless zombies who hadn't possessed sufficient cognitive capacity to benefit from the Liberation Protocol. Marcus Rodriguez established the first integrated patrol units, where enhanced beings provided physical strength and resilience while baseline humans contributed tactical planning and equipment maintenance. These partnerships proved remarkably effective against both residual zombie threats and the environmental challenges of rebuilding civilization in a post-apocalyptic world. "We're stronger together than either species could be alone," he reported after 6 months of successful joint operations. Dr. Foster continued her research, but with a new focus on medical cooperation between enhanced and baseline humans rather than weapons development. Her work led to breakthrough treatments for conditions that had plagued survivors for years, utilizing enhanced healing abilities to benefit baseline humans while using baseline medical knowledge to address enhancement-related health issues. As the first anniversary of the Liberation approached, the continent had transformed into something neither Patterson nor the original survivors had envisioned. Enhanced and baseline humans had created a new form of civilization that preserved the best aspects of both populations while developing solutions to challenges that neither could have solved alone. The battle for the future of Dead America had ended not with victory or defeat, but with evolution towards something unprecedented in human history, a truly cooperative multi-species society built on choice, respect, and mutual survival.